Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We're back with another episode coming up here, dropping on Thursday at noon as always. And with me today, as always, again, is Swig, and we're going to get right into it with the New York Knicks and the trade they made for Derrick Rose, bringing him back with Tom Thibodeau, the head coach, going back to their Chicago days. And here he is in his second tenure with the Knicks. Hopefully goes a little bit better than the last time, or a lot bit better. What are your thoughts on the Derrick Rose trade, and welcome in?
Well, thanks, man. With Rose, you know the Thibodeau connection where he likes to coach his former players. So just from that perspective, to me, it's about as predictable as whatever team Tom Brady playing for getting a couple of favorable calls in a football game. I mean, and we didn't see any of that yesterday, did we? No. Anyway, from a transaction standpoint, but like, what did we give up to get him? I don't think it's really a problem. So the Knicks brought Rose back for the second time. He played one season for us. I think it was 2016-17 under Jeff Hornacek. It was the last year Carmelo Anthony was with the Knicks. It was a pretty forgettable season. This time, the Knicks acquired him from Detroit in exchange for Dennis Smith Jr. and a second-round pick that the Knicks owned that was originally Charlotte's pick. So right now, that's supposed to be around number 40, 41 in the draft, somewhere in there. From that part of it, I don't really mind. Dennis Smith Jr. wasn't playing for the Knicks anyway. He actually volunteered to go to the G League just so he could get some playing time because he's been out of the rotation for well over a month, only played 3 games. And the Knicks already have Detroit's second-round pick actually already. And that second-round pick is going to be at the very beginning of the round because the Pistons are terrible. So it's basically an end of the first-round pick. So that side I don't mind. To me, the bigger issue is who's Rose going to take the playing time away from? And I know that's what everyone said on Twitter. I agree with it for once. I'm worried, knowing Thibs' affinity for veterans, that it's going to take minutes away from Emmanuel quickly. I really sincerely hope that's not the case because he needs to be playing. And at the same time, I'm worried about it because a Bulls friend of mine pointed out, not only is Elfrid Payton playing a bunch of minutes right now, but when he was with the Bulls, Keith Bogans played 34 minutes a night. So I'm a little concerned.
Oh, yeah, I remember the Keith Bogans out there. I mean, he was not a good basketball player. I'm just going to put it blunt. He was not fun to watch. But there he was out there.
If you're listening, take offense to this.
He was not fun to watch. I mean, it was just pitiful. But anyway, going back to the Derrick Rose coming here to New York, I think it's interesting because it shows that they're still in a fight for the playoffs, and maybe he brings that to them. Obviously, you wanted to build culture here. You wanted Tibbs to come in and play defense, and he has. His defense has looked really good and improved. You're getting a production year out of Julius Randle. Do you think that exceptional year from Julius Randle so far, or breakout year, I should say, has made them consider making this move for Derrick Rose that puts them over the top as not a contender, but a playoff team?
I do think it's a factor. Randall has been a legitimate all-star candidate so far this season, but he's also really the only Knicks player who is capable of creating his own shot right now. You see the occasional thing like where RJ Barrett can get into the lane, but the Knicks are not much of a jump shooting team. That's still going to be a problem. It's not like Derrick Rose fixes that, but Rose can come in and create his own shot, which should hopefully help with the spacing a little bit. He's a better passer than Elfrid Payton is, if nothing else, but I'm really curious to see how Thibodeau uses him this time around because he is a natural point guard who plays the same position as Quickly and Elfrid Payton, who have been the only 2 point guards playing. And the early indication is that it looks like the Knicks are going to remove Austin Rivers from the rotation to make room for Rose. Rivers has slumped a bit after a really nice start, but I still like what he's brought to the team and his ability to defend 2 positions, which I'd argue Derrick Rose isn't capable of doing.
He isn't. I think that's a good point for you. And also the point about whose minutes are you going to be taken away? You say Austin Rivers. If it's Emmanuel Quickly, there could be some problems. I mean, you give him these minutes, you draft him in the first round. He's looked really good so far in his rookie season, and I think he's done a great job with that role. You have the veteran there in Elfrid Payton, so it's kind of strange to see them go after a point guard. If there was no Thibodeau connection, I don't think there's no chance. There is no chance they make this trade for Derrick Rose right now. But the thing is, they're lacking in shooting. And I want to bring up a stat real quick, or not necessarily a stat, but a tendency of Derrick Rose. When he got to Minnesota, I believe in 2019, he started shooting threes more and hitting them with more consistency. And that transitioned a little bit more to Detroit. So hopefully he can bring that to the Knicks where he can be a lockdown or a knockdown shooter. So that brings them a little bit more consistency from the shooting side.
He has definitely increased his perimeter shooting to an extent, but nobody's going to confuse him for Steph Curry either. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just his biggest strength is getting to the rim, finishing at the basket. He does have a decent mid-range game. We've seen that throughout his career, but he's actually well known for that issue with depth perception, which makes jump shots more difficult for him. He's improved as his athleticism has started to fade a little bit where he can't get to the rim as much. So I'm not saying he is a complete liability as a shooter, but he's really not much of a step above Payton as a shooter. That's one thing that Quickly can bring to the Knicks that most of the team can't. And even though Payton is the starter, for the most part, Quickly has been finishing a lot of games, finishing a lot of quarters, getting 20, 25 minutes a night consistently, sometimes more. But as much as the Knicks are right now a playoff team, and I don't think that it's impossible they sneak into the back end of the playoffs, I'm still a little bit worried about the long-term outlook because the Knicks, let's say they do sneak into the playoffs, are unlikely to advance past the first round. I think that's fair to say. We play one of the Eastern contenders. We will most likely lose in 4 or 5 games. I'm not saying that's not a sign of progress, but I also don't want the Knicks to be taking away that vital and key development playing time from Quickly or Obi Toppin, who's only playing 10 minutes a night as it is. I know Rose won't affect his playing time necessarily, but I want to see these younger guys still getting the minutes. And if the Knicks do eventually hit a losing streak, fall kind of out of that contention, I really do hope Thibodeau adjusts and plays these younger guys more. But Rose did seem to agree that his role this time around in New York is going to be more mentoring the young guys, especially Quickly.
Yeah, and he could have declined this trade, and he wanted to come back. He said, "You know what? I'm playing for Coach Tibbs. I know what I'm going to bring to this team," and he knew exactly what he was doing before he got into it. Otherwise, he wouldn't play. So, good move by Rose, buying into what they're saying, and I think he's going to help this team out a lot. Worth noting here. Maybe Thibodeau's feeling a little bit of nostalgia. He gave Taj Gibson a lot of action, or not necessarily a lot. He gave him more action over the weekend, and Gibson had 9 points. So I don't think he's going to play a lot. But it's sort of weird that they go get Rose after seeing Gibson on the floor. Maybe a little nostalgic move there by Coach Tibbs.
We're still paying Joe Kim Noah too, unfortunately. Yeah, is he going to bring Luol Deng out of retirement next? But
I hear Bogans is a free agent.
Get out of here. What? We'll sign C.J. Watson, bring that whole 2011 era Bulls team back.
Maybe Nate Robinson woke up from the knockout.
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to like him anymore. I liked him a lot when he was with the Knicks. But the thing with Gibson's kind of interesting because he did play a few minutes in the Knicks games over the weekend because Nerlens Noel was out. Other than that, he's mostly been riding the bench since the Knicks signed him off the scrap heap. But Taj Gibson did make a 3-pointer in the Knicks game against Miami. I wasn't expecting that, but he's mostly there as a reserve big that's playing when Mitchell Robinson, who got into rare foul trouble in the Miami game a little bit, and with Noel missing games here and there, he provides a little insurance. But I don't mind that when he's only playing very limited minutes when the Knicks don't really have any other options, and I still like him as a veteran. But we are seeing Elfrid Payton consistently playing 30, 32 minutes a night, and he is, let's say, underwhelming. I do think the Knicks aren't done making moves, though. I've read that there's some interest in Payton around the league from contending teams to be a backup. I've seen that there's interest in Austin Rivers as well. So I don't think the Knicks are done making moves, but I don't think it's going to be anything major before the trade deadline. I wouldn't call Derrick Rose a super major acquisition. He's a big name, but he's not the star player he once was. So I think it's more of a familiarity type of standpoint move, possibly a mentorship, because unlike the last time when the Knicks clearly were just getting Rose for that one season and then we're going to let him walk, which they did, I think this time, since Rose is on an expiring contract and will be much cheaper, that he might be a legitimate option to stick around for another season or two after this.
That would make sense with Coach Tibbs sticking around too. I mean, maybe you part ways with someone like Elfrid Payton to bring back Rose for that. I mean, that's a good point there. And then plus Quickly will be in year 2, so maybe you could do a combo with that. Let's look at this real quick from the Pistons side of things. They get Dennis Smith Jr., who believe it or not, came over to the Knicks in the Porzingis deal.
Mhm.
He is now heading to Detroit. He's not really had the best career. Very good slasher. That's about all he brings to the table. They also get a second round pick you brought up earlier. What do you think this does for the Pistons side?
It's really interesting from the Pistons side because they got Weaver, the new GM, who at first looked like he was going to tear everything down completely in the offseason. And then he gave out a bunch of these contracts to some reclamation projects. And Jeremy Grant, who, in fairness, has had a bit of a career year in Detroit, unfortunately for him, on a terrible team. But if you're the Pistons, I think you could have gotten more out of this trade. I really do. And the Knicks, I wouldn't call them a contender. But there were contenders like the Nets and the Clippers who were interested in the services. I know that they probably weren't going to get more than a late first at the most from one of those teams. But I feel like they could have gotten a little bit more from a basketball standpoint. I think it was more, Rose clearly did want to come to the Knicks. The Pistons were willing to help him out there. But the draft pick, I think, is more important to the Pistons because they're going to have a very high draft pick. They might have the best odds at number 1 overall. They're going to have a pick most likely around number 40 in the second round. So they're going to have 3 picks in the top 40 because I believe they have a second first round pick. So I understand it from that side. But Dennis Smith Jr., I think he is going to get some playing time, though, because Killian Hayes is out right now. And I do think will get some minutes. And the Pistons are taking a look at similar guys who were drafted high and haven't lived up to their billing. They brought in Josh Jackson, who was Phoenix's draft pick a couple of years ago. I think it was the same draft as Dennis Smith, actually. And they also have Jahlil Okafor on the roster. So, I mean, do you think he'll end up getting that playing time with Hayes out?
I do. I think he steps right in there and plays. Not, I'm not going to say a ton, but I think he gets a lot more minutes than he was in New York. I mean, he's going to get some playing time there, and who knows? Maybe he has a career resurgence. I liked him in Dallas. I'm not going to lie. I liked him. Of course, things didn't go as well as he hoped, but I like watching him play. I think given some playing time, not having the pressure to succeed. I mean, of course, Detroit's still a big city, but they're not batting down on their athletes because they're used to losing all the time. So that's it's not like the New York side where if you have one bad thing, you're going to be in the press for a solid week. So I think that's clear in the head there for Dennis Smith could also be beneficial to his career as well.
Well, Smith, that first year he was with the Mavericks, he had a very solid rookie season. He scored 15 a game. He is more of a slasher, but he's a great athlete too. And I remember watching him at North Carolina State where he was a really dynamic player. And it was actually amazing that he fell the ninth in the draft. That was a big upset. There were talks he would go as high as number 1 earlier in the season. It looked like number 4 in that pre-draft process. The Knicks had a chance to draft him at number 8 and took Ntilikina instead. It kind of came full circle when he eventually ended up with the Knicks. But he got off to a decent start, but he's not a shooter. He wasn't a very good defender. In his brief appearances this year, he does seem to have improved on the defensive end a little bit, but we haven't seen enough of him to really know for sure. We don't know if his shooting has improved. So I think this is definitely an opportunity for him. I think Detroit fully intends to give him a look, similar to why they're giving Josh Jackson and Jahlil Okafor some minutes. I get it. If they're able to resurrect the career a little bit, they might have been able to buy low on a talented young player who still is only 22 years old. So I would say it's too early to give up on him, but he has definitely declined a bit since that rookie year in Dallas where he looked promising. At the same time, though, they do get that second round pick out of it, which in a very deep 2021 draft class. I haven't mentioned that yet. So that's something the Pistons want to prioritize, kind of building from the ground up. We'll see if they end up dealing Blake Griffin next.
Yeah, he could be on the move. And that's going to bring us to our poll question of the week, real quick. You can check that out on Twitter at the Big City Sports PD. Does the trade for Derrick Rose make the New York Knicks playoff contenders? That is going to be the trade. It's either yes or no. So feel free to answer that over there on Twitter. It should be up already. Check it out over there and please vote. Let's get into the Rangers. The Rangers, of course, dropped the game on Monday night to the Islanders, losing 2-0. And it's been a string of these things for the Rangers where they're playing not the best hockey that you want to see. Although I will say one thing, their penalty kill has looked a lot better these past few games. I think that's one of the bright spots, but they can't get it done in the faceoff circle. And it's killing this team with time of possession.
God, I could go on a long rant about faceoffs. They've been terrible at it for years, but it's really, really evident this season. Zibanejad's not winning any draws. Strome's not winning any draws. It's just going up and down the lineup. So that's the big thing with them. The puck possession, we're having to chase things down both on the power play, the penalty kill. They have to do a lot of those synchronized zone entries that have, let's say, mixed results. The Rangers they rebounded slightly after a bit of a rough patch, but they lost a game tonight to the Islanders where they overall played pretty well, but unfortunately couldn't finish any scoring chances. Varlamov, who's off to a very good start for the Islanders, was great all night. I thought Shesterkin played very well for the Rangers, but it was the type of game where it was clear whoever scored the first goal was going to win, and that's exactly what happened after 2.5 periods. But the faceoffs are an issue. But I want to bring something up. The centers are the ones who take that. God, the absence of Filipino is looking pretty evident right now, don't you think? Because even when he was healthy, center was a clear weak spot for the Rangers. But Zibanejad only has 1 goal so far this year. Heedle's been out, and Ryan Strome and Brett Howden, to me, are incredibly underwhelming 2 and 3 center options.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Brett Howden too. I mean, he's not winning any draws, and I mean, he's a good forechecker. I think that's okay. I think you could put that in the conversation, and he's looked pretty good on the penalty kill. But outside of that, I'm not liking what I'm seeing out of Brett Howden. I mean, this team. I want to talk a little bit on the defensive side as well. I mean, I know we talked about the Tony DeAngelo situation in the last episode, and I think his absence on the ice is paving a little bit of dividends here. The defensive depth has been tested these past few games, and it's not looking too good to where they're not putting up much of a fight without some of these said superstars on the team.
Yeah, D'Angelo, from an on ice perspective, anyone interested in the off ice perspective should check out last week's episode. We did a big segment on that. But from an on ice perspective, he's a very skilled offensive defenseman who can quarterback a power play, have a good stretch pass to create the rush, create scoring opportunities. He is an absolute liability on the defensive end. But he was also stuck in the few games he did play this season playing with Jack Johnson, who's the equivalent of a human traffic cone, or Brendan Smith, who isn't much better for the first 6 games that he did play. And both of them are actually injured right now as well. So the Rangers, from a defense perspective, their top 4 of Ryan Lindgren, Adam Fox, Keandre Miller, and Jacob Trouba has remained intact. But that third pair has been a revolving door. D'Angelo's gone. Johnson sucks and is injured. Smith also isn't great and is injured. So right now it's Anthony Bitetto, and who was the 8th defenseman overall on the roster. And I think much more intriguingly, Libor Hayek has been playing as well. He was actually the centerpiece of the Ryan McDonough, JT Miller trade return. Him and Howden came over. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Rangers lost that trade. Hayek, I thought he looked decent. He's played 2 games. He did have a pretty bad mistake that led to one of the Islanders' goals tonight, but I want to see him getting that ice time.
Yeah, it's good to see the ice time there. I mean, especially when you're down to this many defensemen, it's not worth throwing another veteran into the ring of the mix when you can give meaningful playing time here. I mean, everyone knows the Rangers aren't going to win the cup this season. That's just a fact. So giving them that ice time right now when the depth is being tested, I think it could only benefit them. And of course, you mentioned being the centerpiece of the Ryan McDonough trade. He's got a lot of expectations to live up to. I mean, that's him and Howden both. I talked about Howden earlier not getting the job done. I don't like what I've seen out of him, but I think he can there. Just more ice time, getting more developmental purposes. I think he might end up being somewhat decent. But then again, Ryan McDonough's won a Stanley Cup.
Right, I don't think it's even about that. I mean, that was kind of the point for the Lightning, and they did re-sign him to a big contract. JT Miller's off in Vancouver, but those are 2 very significant pieces the Rangers gave up. And 3 years ago today, at the time of recording, is actually when the Rangers wrote their famous letter signaling their intention to rebuild, and that McDonough-Miller trade was one of the first dominoes to fall. And Hayek toiled away in the AHL for a little bit, played some mediocre at best hockey games last season. But think of it this way. He was the guy that the Rangers patted themselves on the back for getting. We're talking Tampa Bay here. I wanted to target Braden Point or Mikhail Sergachev because McDonough and Miller are significant pieces. Instead, we get Hayek, who this season broke with the club as the 9th defenseman, who was only in the lineup because Johnson and Smith are hurt and D'Angelo was put on waivers. That's not exactly a promising sign. And Howden, to me, is an AHL player who's playing the 3rd center role. I thought he played his best game tonight. That line with him and Lafreniere and Phil DiGiuseppe was, I think, the Rangers' best line tonight. But overall, to me, he is a 4th line center at best. I want to set the bar a little bit higher, considering what the Rangers gave up to bring those two on board. The Rangers still have a very bright future, and there are some positive signs. I think we got to talk about the defense a little bit.
We do. I think we want to get into the defense a little bit more, but I hope this isn't the conversation we're having in 3 years about what the Cubs could have gotten in the Yu Darvish trade when they ended up getting three fourth graders instead. Hopefully, that's not our conversation going forward. But to your point, I mean, they could have gotten some of these better players. You mentioned Sergachev. He's been a nice piece on that championship winning Lightning team. But yeah, let's get into the defense. I like what I've seen out of Keandre Miller. It's still very early in his season, and I think he's looked pretty good. Adam Fox is, I believe, second on the team in points, if I'm not mistaken. He's looked pretty good as well. Once again, the offensive defenseman there. I want to see more defensive defensemen come to New York to where they can actually play defense, because a lot of them do a lot of the same things where they're puck moving or getting up and down the ice, and there's not really that one consistent defensive defenseman that can change the game.
Well, I think it's getting better. So, starting with Fox and Miller, they were the first two I wanted to bring up. They look great. Fox, in particular, is playing like at an elite level right now, getting 26, 27 minutes a night in all situations on power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. He's been paired with Ryan Lindgren, who I think is the Rangers' best defensive stay-at-home type of defender right now on the team. Those two have a solid chemistry going. They actually played together for the World Juniors for the U.S. team a couple years ago. So they got that familiarity. They have complementing skill sets. Miller has also been incredibly intelligent when he's been on the ice. He has definitely shown the ability to close gaps and use that really long reach, since he's 6'5", to make plays with a stick, almost always in position. I've been really impressed with him. And Trouba has looked better. He still hasn't shown that 40-point ability that we saw in Winnipeg, and I'm hoping that that comes out, because he could be a complete defenseman. But Miller and Trouba have definitely been a solid pair as well. It's mostly just that third pair that I've been discouraged by, but they're also down to their 8th and 9th choices on defense. Although I would argue that Jack Johnson should be below all of them. I think the bigger issue long term is still that center spot. And that's why I mentioned before the Rangers, I'm sure, were interested in Pierre-Luc Dubois before he got sent to Winnipeg, and why I fully expect the Rangers to make a big move for a center in the offseason. They're not going to do it at the trade deadline, because I agree the Rangers are not contenders this year. I don't think they will be next year either. I think the year after is a more realistic target, but it's still a team with a bright future, with a loaded farm system. And I know that the Rangers are going to want as many of those guys as possible to be impact NHL players for the Rangers, but there's not going to be room for everybody. So somebody is going to get moved in an effort to help the team win in a sooner window. So I don't think it's impossible they go after a Jack Eichel or an Alexander Barkov. They might have to set the bar a little lower, but they're going to look for a legitimate number one center.
Yeah, and going back real quick on the defense, Keandre Miller leads the team in plus minus with a +7 on the Rangers. I mean, that's good. That's very good. I want to bring up a name. I know you're probably going to be like, really? But coming over as a center, obviously his off the ice issues right now aren't the best to where he needs to get healthy. But what would you think of Jonathan Toews going to the New York Rangers?
Well, yeah, you would know better than me. What's his contract?
It's pretty lengthy. I mean, it'd probably have to be via trade, of course. I don't think they'd release any. If you release Jonathan Toews, you're nuts. But I think if he comes over there, he's good at winning faceoffs. He still puts up points given his age. He looks pretty solid. He's not going to be a young gun, but he might cost you a little bit cheaper than some of the other players you've mentioned already.
I would only consider it if the Blackhawks were willing to retain a significant portion of his salary, because the Rangers are already paying way too many guys that aren't on the team anymore. Kevin Shattenkirk, Henrik Lundqvist, D'Angelo eventually. It's not a great situation there. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think they're going to look for a younger, even more productive player at this stage in his career. One last note I want to say is Igor Shesterkin has started to come into form after a bit of a rough start, and he is clearly taking over that number one goalie job for the Rangers.
He has. I liked his thing in the heading to the locker room where he gave a little jab at Panera. That was a little fun in games, of course, before the Georgiev miscommunication.
That was the joke. He was pretending he was going after Georgiev like D'Angelo did. I got it. That was pretty funny. It's amazing how much more fun they'll have when you win a game.
Yeah, it is. It's just the whole mood changes between games and stuff. So that's good. That's good stuff. Heading over to the Islanders. Let's talk about them for a little bit. This Islanders team we mentioned earlier, where they're not scoring goals, they're playing defense and barely scaping by. Well, that's starting to bite them in the butt. They lost a few games here, but of course they did beat the Rangers 2-0. Of course, I don't think this cannot be sustained. I haven't seen this bad of offense since the Nashville Predators a few years ago. I mean, how many times are you going to watch this Islanders team not score goals? I mean, it's got to be the most frustrating thing to watch as a fan.
Before the Islanders won the game earlier tonight and their previous game, they had lost 5 straight games. They did manage to get 1 point out of 2 of them, but the lack of offense is finally starting to catch up to them a little bit. And we have even seen the occasional cracks in the defensive zone. Philadelphia was putting up 3 or 4 goals a night against them. They're not an invincible team. They still have some inexperience on the blue line with guys like Noah Dobson playing with Andy Green, and that pairing, I'd say, has been underwhelming so far this season. But the Islanders do play with a lot of discipline, a lot of relentless energy on the forecheck. That gave the Rangers problems all night tonight. And that aggressive style is not an easy one to play against, which is why teams struggle to score goals. That and Semyon Varlamov is off to a fantastic start for the Islanders this year. He deserves a lot of credit, but the Islanders are still shuffling their top 6 forwards. Brock Nelson has been AWOL to start this season. Barzal really has been the only Islanders forward that's been consistent to start this season.
He has. He leads their team in points, which isn't hard. I mean, heck, you give me 20 minutes of ice time, I might find the back of the net more than some of these players. But you look at their defense. That's something that's obviously on the forefront for them. Nick Leddy and Scott Mayfield have been horrible. I mean, absolutely atrocious to start the year. I mean, I haven't seen Nick Leddy play this bad in a very long time. And it's this Islanders team. I mean, of course, you're going to have your cracks throughout the season, but I think that could be a cause for concern from those two defensemen.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a super long-term issue. I thought Leddy played a much better game tonight, personally, although I wasn't quite as high on what Mayfield was bringing to the table. We know what Leddy is capable of as a guy who can carry the puck out of the zone and also be responsible in his own end. And you're on a Barry Trotz coach team. You got to be responsible defensively. And we all know Leddy's capable of that on a mostly younger Islanders defense core outside of Andy Green, of course, who's 38 now, I believe, and near the end of his career. But I do like what I'm seeing from Noah Dobson, and at least seeing him get that ice time, because he's basically the Devon Toews replacement right now. And we know how important he was as a top 4 defenseman for the Islanders in that playoff run. And losing him is having a significant impact in both zones. One name to keep an eye on, though, the Islanders have a defense prospect by the name of Samuel Bolduc, or Bolduc. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But he is finally playing with the AHL team for the Islanders, which is Bridgeport. That season is about to start. And quick side note, have you seen the schedule that the Islanders AHL team and the Rangers AHL team is going to play?
I have not.
Okay, so I thought this was funny. So similar to the NHL, there's the AHL's only playing teams within their division, right? But in the Hartford Wolfpack, which is the Rangers case, and the Bridgeport Islanders affiliate, those two, along with the Bruins affiliate in Providence, they are the only 3 teams in their division. So they're just going to be playing each other for the foreseeable future for this entire season. So every other division, I think 28 AHL teams are playing this year, but the other divisions have at least 5 or 6 teams in them. This one only has 3. So if one of them has some COVID cases running through, the other 2 are going to be playing each other a lot.
Yo, that's a good point to bring up here. Imagine if Ross Johnson got sent down to the AHL team. That's going to be a lot of fights going on, the bickering back and forth between those two. That'd be something I'd if you could get my butt in the seat right there. Those 3 playing multiple times, that would be. I mean, that's almost like Goon, to where they keep playing each other. All they do is go to the game to see the fights.
Oh, man, what a great movie. And then tying that back into the physical aspect of the Islanders, they're a more physical team, and Barzal is actually leading the team in penalty minutes right now. So he does need – that is one critique. I mean, you can't have him continuing to take these dumb offensive zone penalties and costing them the limited chances of offense that they usually have. And then some of the veteran forwards, especially Leo Komarov, have really struggled to start this season. He played a couple of ugly games, was put on the taxi squad for a bit. And considering the financial resources the Islanders invested into these guys. I know we've hit on that before. They should at least be expecting them to play some their games, to play to their strengths to the best of their abilities. And so far, we really just haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's been rough. One more thing that's rough for these Islanders is obviously the great start to the season for Semyon Varlamov, but the same cannot be said about Ilya Sorokin. He's only played in 3 games, but he has not looked good so far to start his NHL career.
Well, the first two, one, he had to play one against the Rangers where Varlamov got hurt in warmups after Cal Clutterbuck accidentally tagged him with a shot. And that's not obviously a great position for you to play your first game. And the second game, I want to say, was a 1 or 2 nothing loss where the Islanders didn't score. So it's hard to blame him too much. Sorokin is, I think, competed very well. He's clearly a gamer. I think him dueling with Shesterkin in some of these Rangers Islanders games will be fun to watch, the countrymen, but not off to a great start. But it's also a really small sample size, and he'll get better as he gets more comfortable.
Yeah, let's talk about a team that has a young goalie that's off to a good start with the Chicago Blackhawks. This Blackhawks team is picking it up, and believe it or not, they're 1 point out of first place in that division. That's not good. And I mean, I guess it's good. It's just struggling right now. And frankly, a lot of these teams have had a lot of COVID cases in this division, with Carolina missing time, Dallas missing time. So that has given the Hawks an opportunity to jump up in the division standings a little bit and keep losing in overtime. So actually, they won one in overtime on the last game. But I mean, they get to the overtime and they find a way to lose. But hey, I wanted to talk about the young goalie, of course, Lankinen. We brought him up before. He's only lost 1 game in 8 starts, and he has looked phenomenal. I mean, of course, he's had some overtime losses, 1 regulation loss, and that's 7 out of 8 times getting a point. So he's looked good, and the team around him is starting to pick it up, and I'm excited to watch him.
The Blackhawks have gotten at least 1 point in 9 of their last 10 games. The defense has been better than expected to start the season. I still think there's a lot of room for improvement there personally, but Connor Murphy's off to a great start. Lankinen's off to a great start. And in the game on Sunday where they finally did win in overtime, I think we got to give Malcolm Subban credit where it's due. He was outstanding. He's kind of used to, frankly, getting several days off in between starts since he's been a backup for the 3 or 4 seasons he's been in the NHL, but he gets his name called for the game Sunday. He made some huge saves. DeBrincat finally won it in overtime, and I'm sure you're excited to talk about him because he's been off the charts.
Yeah, ever since he came back from the COVID list, he's got four goals in the last 2 games. Of course, one was an empty netter, but still, I'm going to count it. That's two 2-goal games for him back to back. So he's finally finding the back of the net, something he didn't do at all of last year. I mean, I guess he has, but not near his 39, 38 goals that he's used to scoring a season. So it's good to see the cat get back in action, putting the puck in the back of the net. And I'm going to be honest. I brought this up after the show. I think this Hawks team would be a lot different right now, in a much better position to where they could be making the playoffs with a healthy Jonathan Taves, a healthy Kirby Dach. If that's the case, your center depth is off the charts. You talk about the Rangers not having any. Dylan Strome would be your third line center. You'd have David Kampf not playing because Pius Suter would be on line 4. You have Janmark, who's had a good season so far. Andrew Shaw on that checking line. You get to break it up there. Kane, of course. Kurashev's look good. Kubalik. I mean, I haven't even mentioned him yet. So this team, I think, if everyone was healthy, there was a report real quick out about Brent Seabrook today from Stan Bowman. He's just not impressed with anything going on with him. It seems like he's not going to be seeing any action anytime soon or getting on the ice anytime soon. So best wishes out to him. But I think this Hawks team, if they were entirely healthy, I know you don't want to play ifs, but if they were entirely healthy, I think this team could definitely be in the postseason.
With the Blackhawks, we knew going in, I don't think anyone was really too concerned offensively. They have some dynamic players both at the center and the wing positions. If you have Strome as a third line center, I'd be shocked if they stuck Pius Suter, who's off to a nice start on line 4. I think they'd move a couple of these guys to the wing because his development in ice time is a lot more important than Matthias Janmark, for example, and nothing personal there. But from a Blackhawks perspective, they need to be getting these younger players on the ice. Hopefully Colleton's a little bit more consistent with that, where he wants to put his young players in the best position to succeed. I still think that the defense is showing some cracks here and there. I mean, I like what I've seen from Murphy a lot, but I still haven't been very impressed with Zadorov, for example. I don't love what I've seen from Calvin DeHaan so far this year. There have definitely been bright spots, but I still have doubts that it's sustainable. This division is going to get stronger as Dallas comes back, and we all know how good the Lightning are, defending Stanley Cup champions. I still think the Hurricanes are a really good team that haven't found their footing yet. And I do want to give the goaltending some credit for being a legitimate strength so far this season. But considering the lack of track record and the inconsistent defense, I would temper expectations slightly. They could still sneak into the playoffs, but the Blackhawks are not a contender to win the Stanley Cup this year either.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. And I like what I've seen out of Ian Mitchell on the back end, too. He's looked really good. And this is strange because the defense has looked really good these last 2 weeks. So where I mean, you mentioned nine out of 10 games they gotten a point. You know who's been off the ice?
Who's that?
Adam Boquist. He hasn't played in 2 weeks. So if he comes back and things start getting a little lost out there on the defensive side, maybe that could be an issue. I mean, you saw the Bulls when Lauri Markkanen missed time. They looked better defensively and started winning. Maybe Boquist is in that same category. I mean, he does a lot offensively, but he's kind of like an Eric Gustafson who used to be on this roster where you could play the offense a little bit, but you get burned on the defensive side. But he's still developing as well.
He is. It's going to be interesting to see how his return eventually impacts the Blackhawks chemistry. But overall, I still don't think there's any doubt that he will be put in the lineup, and they'll just have to take their lumps with him because when he's at his best, the offense that he can create on a dynamic roster is usually going to outweigh the occasional defensive lapse or even the frequent defensive lapse that can sometimes get covered up if this goaltending continues to be solid. So we'll see how that impacts the team. But we have seen examples before where a bad defender ends up getting injured and the team actually improves without them there. And we've seen it in basketball. I've seen it in hockey. So I am curious to see how he does. But DeBrincat, if considering how well he's played since he's come off the list, we could see Boquist have a similar impact.
Yeah, it could. I mean, it's definitely something to watch out for. And I want to give kudos to Colleton. I know I've usually roasted him on this show, but I mean, he's done a pretty solid job. I don't think his defensive structure is still where it needs to be. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing he's lacking, but the power plays look good. He's getting his guys to buy in. One issue that I do have is the ice time of Dominic Kubalik. This is a goal scorer who, when he gets the puck on the power play and you set him up, I don't think there's anyone that hits it harder in the NHL that just freaking one time on a tee just slings that thing. I mean, he has one of the most wickedest shot from the left side in the NHL. And I think you need to keep putting him on the ice and try to set him up in those positions. And one more name that's been shooting the puck hard that you wouldn't expect, Philip Kurashev, the rookie, broke glass today. He shattered the glass in practice. And we're like, what?
I wish that could have happened during the game. That's always awesome, especially because no fans are there to get hit by it unless you're overall, though, I do like what I've seen from Kurashev. I just think Kubalik needs to be playing in a top six role. Putting him in the bottom six is going to shelter him and also stick him with line mates who can't create offense.
Yeah, it is. Just get him on the ice. Get your best players on the ice. That's going to do it for today. I thought the hockey talk today was pretty solid. We got a lot of good input on all the teams, and then of course the Derrick Rose trade as well. But outside of that, we don't have anything else for you. Hopefully these hockey teams can keep winning. Right now, it seems like all three are a little bit stagnant. So I'm sure a winning drive from all of these teams would definitely be beneficial to their success and to our talking points, because who doesn't want to talk about winning success? But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. I know I've already said that, but I'm going to say it again. So feel free to check us out. We're everywhere. Spotify, also Apple Podcasts. Click the 5 stars. Leave a review. We might have a special present for you if you do leave a nice review or a creative one. And share it with your friends. I mean, who wouldn't want to share this show with your friends? Get it out there. New York, Chicago. We like to dive into all these things. Plus, you might get an occasional Detroit talk there with the Pistons, or just an occasional spotty team that pops up from time to time. But other than that, we're also on YouTube. You can see our faces. And outside of that, I think that's going to wrap it up. So for Swig, I'm Dylan Kern signing off. This is the Big City Sports Podcast. We will see you next time.